yesterday, even though I wasn't here.
We heard you. Yeah, we did hear you. Baruch Hashem. Okay, so we'll go back to the Gemara. Tanina lot is under Rabban. Shaitu b'katan shenosu noshim umesu. A shaitu in the cotton, their kedushin is not valid. So in fact, their wives are not really their wives. Therefore, nishaysaya paturis minachalitum naibum, because they were never married. Ketad. And once again, the Bach takes out the word haya and replaces it with the word haray. Haray Yisrael shabal bas koyin toichel b'truma. A Yisrael who is ba on a bas koyin. So even though she did znus, this bas koyin, she can still eat truma. But Ibra, if she became pregnant, then loy toichel, then she could not eat anymore. In fact, the Gemara, even the Ibra, loy toichel, since if she became pregnant, she may no longer eat truma. So how could we allow her to eat truma if she did znus with a Yisrael? Maybe she became pregnant, and therefore she is now usher to eat truma. So how could the Mishnah say that she can eat truma unless she's Ibra? She should not be able to eat truma regardless, because maybe she was Ibra. Oh, thank you so much, Matthew. Zakmar Milay Tnan, does it not say when 3 men married 3 women, and after they were married, when they came to the Nisuin, or when they came to going home to their apartments, the women were mixed up, which means each one of these women might have been novellas. To someone who's not their husband, they would have been an Eshishish, and if they became pregnant, each of these women might have mamzerim. So the loch is marvrishin ois and gimel chadoshim. They don't let them marry anybody for 3 months. Shema muberasei. Because if they were expecting from that first night, the children would be mamzerim, and we would want to know if they are mamzerim and if they have other children that are not mamzerim. So we want to know which ones would be kosher, which ones wouldn't be. But whatever the case is, you see that we are concerned that they became pregnant the very first night. When it comes to Yuchsin, to make sure that we can have clarity in who each child is, Chashu, they're uber careful and they'll separate them. But Latruma Lechashu, here in our Shaila, where a Vaskoy just its nose, her child is not a mamzer. So there's no problem of Yuchsin. It's merely a question of should we allow her to eat Truma? We're not concerned. But that's not true. Latruma Lechashu, Latanya Reza Gitich Shah Achas Koydon Misasi. If someone who's a Kohen gives his wife, who's not a Kohenes, Bas Yisrael, a get, and he says the get should be valid a moment before I die. No one knows when that moment is. Or he actually said Hashah, an hour before I die. Nobody knows when that hour is. So the halach is Asur Lachal B'Truma Miyad. She must stop eating Truma immediately, because we never know when he'll die, and any moment in time could be an hour before he dies. By Nisuin, when there's a marriage, she became pregnant. Because women will manipulate their bodies actually to become pregnant. But by Znus, Rashi tells us, and we looked earlier in the Masechta, women will manipulate their bodies to reduce the chances of becoming pregnant. And therefore, we're not so concerned by Znus that she became pregnant. By Nisuin, are they choshish that she became pregnant? But Tanya Bas Koyin, Shenisas Li Yisrael, a Bas Koyin that married a Yisrael, which means now she may no longer eat Truma. Who mates, and then her husband dies, and apparently this is on the first night, so she's now allowed to continue eating truma again. She can toivel right away the next day because she's tummy, because she had bia, and then the next evening after Harav Shemesh, she's allowed to eat truma again. But if she became pregnant from the Yisrael, if we're concerned she became pregnant from the Yisrael, how could we let her eat truma the next day? What it means is, we only are not concerned about a pregnancy until 40 days. Because even if she is pregnant, until 40 days, we're not worried. Because if she's not pregnant, in fact, then there's no concern here at all. She's allowed to eat truma. But the Ima Abra, even if she's pregnant from this Israel, Ad Arboim Maya Ba'almadi. Lagabe Hilchas Achilas Truma, the Uber has no power to prevent her from eating truma until 40 days. An Uber until it's 40 days is not considered. An Uber it's considered Maya Ba'alma, and therefore it doesn't prevent it from eating truma. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye said, Ihachi, if you're going to learn that for 40 days there's no problem, well then look at the next part of the brisa. Let's say 4 weeks later, you see she's pregnant. All of the truma that she ate, l'mafreya, she has to make up for. Meaning, she has to give back a keren v'chaimish. Zok Gemara, my mikol kelos adar boyin. What it means is not that 2 weeks after her husband died, she ate truma, that would be mikol kelos. Because in fact, for 40 days, even if she's pregnant, there's not a problem. But what if she ate truma 45 days after her husband died, and then we find out that she was pregnant? So any truma she ate in those 5 days between 40 days and 45 days, where it is considered a number, that's the truma that she has to pay back. Moshe Weinberg told me that the Art Scroll brings down a Ritva who learns differently than Rashi, and learns actually that because she's Mikol Kelos, in fact, we will not let her eat truma right after the 40-day mark. She's not allowed to eat. From our Rashi, it's much where she can continue to eat, and if she finds out that she's pregnant, so then for those days after the 40, she has to pay back. Keren Chaimish. But the Ritva says, in fact, that after 40 days, if she's not showing yet, we still wouldn't allow her to eat truma because maybe she'll show that she's pregnant later. I don't know that Rashi doesn't say the fair thing, but Rashi doesn't seem to say anything other than what the Brisa says, which means up until 40 days it's my ba'alma, and if she eats later, I hear. I guess for 3 months, for the first trimester, because by then she'll be short. So I cannot say definitively that Rashi argues on the Ritva. Rashi doesn't speak it out. It could be Rashi's mind to the Ritva, but the Ritva speaks it out.
I don't know, maybe my note is different, but in my note it says Rashi as well as the Ritva and the Meiri require the woman to repay the principal and the Chaimish.
Require what?
That she repay the principal and Chaimish.
But that's the Gemara says she has to repay. The question is does she have to stop eating truma once the 40-day mark passes?
So I don't see where it says here that the Ritva says otherwise. The next note says once she discovers she's pregnant, she must repay the principal plus a fifth for the truma she ate, all the way back until the end of the 40th day. She's not liable, however, for what she ate during the 40 days, and that it just brings Rashi. It doesn't bring the Ritva.
Okay. So I guess there's different prints of the Art Scroll. Okay, Zok the Helen Gemara weiter. Itmar. In some publications they have print, and then sometimes there's like a blank page, and it says this page was left intentionally blank, or sometimes it's just lines. It says notes. So maybe certain art scrolls have notes in it that those notes bring down the Ritva. Itmar. Someone couldn't wait, and he was boil his arusa, one who's mekudeshes is not allowed to make bia on her, and he made bia on her his arusa, the beis chamav in his shver's house, because that's where his arusa would live. Rav says havlad mamzer. The vlad is a mamzer. Why would the vlad be a mamzer? Is that what you're looking at me and asking me? Zokt Rashi. Rav said the vlad is a mamzer because even though everybody agrees that this child was conceived between him and her, and they're mekudeshes. Chashinan ha'elu prutzahi, since she is a prutza, that she was mizana, so to speak, with her chassan before the nesuin, we're afraid that acher nami ba'ala, the abraminei. You see, she was promiscuous. What about him? Could be he was promiscuous too, but it doesn't make her child a mamzer. So we're choshed that she's promiscuous, and therefore we will treat her child like a mamzer.
But if
why do we treat her any worse than a regular any other woman who was raped, and we don't treat her?
This woman wasn't raped. This woman was novellas willingly.
That's the case.
Yeah, of course.
yeah, but if there was no arusin, the child would not be a mamzer. So why is it with
These
Ersin
are all phenomenal kashas. Let's see the rest of the Gemara and the Gemara will flush it out. Shmuel Amar Havlat Shtuki, we're still with Vlad's on Mamzer, but the Vlad's definitely problematic. Shtuki is if a child says, "Oh, hi, Tati," and his mother says, "That's not your father." That's what a Shtuki is. So it's not such a miyuchas type of a person. Amarav, Mistaver Milsei de Rav. It makes sense to hold like Rav, who holds that the child's a mamzer, is the daima me alma, is if she's a woman who is running around with boys, and we know that she hangs around with boys, and she's choshed, she's a chashuda to have had problems. Rashi the daima me alma shechashuda me'acherim. We've seen her hang out with other boys in addition to her chassan. Therefore, the lecha lechshrei kashar b'nei doimash and ksherim. It's not like any other woman who's mazana. Here we know she's moving around too much. To hasam even to the suahi, right beilas halach achar baal. In the normal case, you say right beilas halach achar baal. Here you have somebody who is not. If she was in the suah and she was mazana, we'll say right beilas achar baal. But on the rusa, who's normally not living with her husband, and we know she's promiscuous, and we know she's hanging around with other men, that's why she's a mamzer. So we didn't uncover the whole story. So Rav is saying, if you uncover the whole story, and she's very choshed, she's always hanging out with other men, that's why we treat the child like a mamzer. But if she's not known to be flirting with men all around, rather she's only hanging around with her chosin, then of course, basar didei shadinolei, we will say that this is the child of the man who was Mekadosh.
How do we take a suffix from Molechumim?
Could you be more specific?
The suffix, whether she was boiled somebody else, and we go to Chumrah, we make it by a mom. That's pretty heavy.
I hear. But she's a chashuda. She's a chashuda, and we have no reason to assume that this child came from this man over any of the other men. You say we should believe because they're both saying. All they're both saying is that there was a bia. That doesn't mean there was no bia from somebody else. So we don't have enough confidence to know who this child came from. How do I know this halacha? The katani, it says yolda toicha. If the woman gave birth, then she can eat truma. So this is talking about if she gave birth to a child, she was mazana with a kohen, right? That's the case of our mission. She was mazana with a kohen, and then she gave birth to a child from the kohen. She's allowed to eat because we assume that this child came from the kohen. So what's the case? If she's been fooling around with other men as well, similar to the case that we're talking about, Yalda amai teichel. Even if she gave birth, why would we assume that the baby's father is this kohen? She could have been with anyone, and maybe the baby's father was any of the other men who she had relations with. Elalav, it must be that when our Mishnah says that if she became pregnant from a kohen, out of marriage, out of wedlock, we can assume that the child born is the kohen's son. Elalav minei daima v'lo daima la'alma. Our Mishnah is only speaking in a case where the only man that she was hanging with was this kohen, but she was not choshed to be with any other man. Therefore, we can assume that the child is a kohen. So if that's the case, madich in the case of a Mishnah, where she was not mikudeshes to this man, he was a total stranger who she was mizana with. The lahai yisura. Not only was it also for her to have relations with any man, it was also also for her to have relations with this man out of wedlock. Nevertheless, we say that being that she wasn't fooling around with anyone else and she wasn't choshed from anyone else, we'll assume that the child is a child of a kohen. But hacha, in our case, where she is mikudeshes to the man who we know there was bia, the lahai yisura to any other man, she's also to have relations with. Lahai yatera to this man, she's mutter to have relationships. I'm sorry. Very good kasha. Surely we would say that if she wasn't fooling around with any other men, we would assume that the child would be the child of her husband, and therefore it would not be a mamzer. So that was what Rava said. So now it becomes more clear. Why is she a mamzer? Because why is she a mamzer? According to the way Rava explains it, is because she was choshed for many men, and therefore we can't tell. But if she's only choshed for one man, we can assume it's the one man. So Mati asks a very simple kasha. It says, we say, what's the bracha? I never got to see the kedushin. But what is the bracha? Asher kedushanu b'mitzvayzov v'tzivonu al harayis v'aser lanu sarusos. Right? The hit the lanu and the sunus lanu are yichud b'kedushin. So what does it mean to the higher Torah? There's no heter for her to marry, for her to have beer with her husband, who's with her aris. I think that's what he's asking. So the Ritva speaks out on this, and the Ritva says that it's also midrabanan. So it's a Torah, it's a mutar midaraisa. Although there's a big machloikis rishonim if an arusa is also midaraisa or not. So you touched on an explosive issue, but the easiest way to navigate this is using the Ritva, who holds that an arusa is only also midrabanan. To everybody else, she's also midaraisa. Once she's an arusa, right? She's an eshes ish, so she's also to everybody midaraisa, and to her husband, she's only also midrabanan. Suba, but that's not midaraisa. No, they make suba, so it shouldn't be so easy to divorce your wife. Okay. So Amalei Abaye, Lo'olam Mei Malach. I would disagree with you, Rabbi, and I would say, if she's choshed to have relations with this man, even if she wasn't choshed to have illegal relations with any other man, nevertheless, Rab would be machmer and still say the vlad mamzer. My timer, the Amina will say, a woman who was mafker herself, her oris, is clearly a woman who's promiscuous, and we automatically are choshed her. What about our Mishnah? If that's the case in our Mishnah, how can we assume that this child is fathered by the Kohen? Maybe it was fathered by someone else who she had a relation with. We know that they were both locked up in jail together for an extended period of time, and the only man that she came in contact with was this Kohen, and that's how this knows that. So therefore, we can assume that the child belongs to the Kohen. Ikadami. There's another nusach of how this story went down. The Baalel kula amalai pligi the basrei didei shadinu. If they both agree, the Baalel means where they both agree that there was an actual bia, everybody agrees that we assume that the father is the father of this child, and therefore it wouldn't be a mamzer. Vachi itmar, and this is what they said. Arusa she'ibra, an arusa that became uberis. Rav Amar Havlad mamzer. Rav says that the blood is mamzer. Ushmul Amar Havlad shesuki, the blood is shesuki. And on that, Rava commented. Amar Rava said, Mistaver Milsa the Rav who said the blood is a mamzer, is the loidaima minei v'daimim malm. We don't think that she hung her out with her husband. It seems more that she fooled around with somebody else, and maybe she's blaming it on her husband. And that's why we say that the child was a mamzer. Aval daima minei, but if it was obvious that she was with him, aval gav the daima ma'alma, even though she showed that she was promiscuous with others as well, but she was also promiscuous with him, then basrei didei shadinim, we will say that he is the father of the blood.
What is he saying?
Well, he's probably saying that he is the father of the blood. Let's see. Rashi says at the beginning of the sugya that they both say in the first nusach that they both say that the child was the father. So let's have a quick look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Avlad Mamzer, according to Rav, both the man and the woman agree. So we're saying over here, here the question is if he was loy bala, or I guess I mean so Rashi is saying that our child over here is if the husband said I did not have beer with you. If the husband said I did not beer with you, And she'll say, yes, you did. So Rav said the Vlad is a mamzer. Where does Rav say the Vlad is a mamzer? Is if we never saw them hanging around together. So the husband's side of the story is more believable. Because why would you say that he slept around with her? He wasn't hanging around with her. But she was hanging around with men that she should not have been hanging around with. But if she was hanging around with him as well, then you wouldn't believe him, and you would say that he fathered the child. The diamond malma was Rishon. Omar Rava, we know Amin Allah. Where do I know this halacha from? From our Mishnah. The Katani Yolda Torah, a woman who had relations with a kohen and they gave birth, she can eat truma on behalf of this child. We assume the child belongs to the kohen. If the only man that she was having a relationship with was with the kohen, it was not anybody else, so I need a Mishnah to tell me a chiddush that we can attribute this child to the kohen. The chiddush of the Mishnah is even if it's the diamond naima me alma, but also she also is seen hanging out with him, we would still assume that the child is from the kohen. Uma hasam, madach over there, where it was as nus with the kohen, there was no marriage there. Nevertheless, we believe her to say that the kohen is the father. Haka, in our case, the lahai yisura lahai teira. In fact, this man is mekudeshes to her, or she's mekudeshes to this man. So surely we would attribute the fathering to this man. Like Kolchkin, surely we would say he's the father. Amalei Abaye, and in this nusach Abaye argues on Rav as well. It says la'olam emalach kolecha de daimim ma'alma avagav daimim Omar Rav Mamzer. Abaye is makmer and said that if she was hanging out with other men, even though she also hung out with him, Rav would still say the child's a mamzer. We can't be sure who the father is. So what about in our Mishnah? Why in the Mishnah do we say we can assume the blood belongs to the father? She didn't hang out with anybody. She didn't hang out with her. She's not a choshen. But she then claimed that this is the father of my child. That's why the child is assumed to be choshen.
Back to the story that we said before. We know that she's hanging out with him and she's hanging out with them. With them, it's no, so she makes sure she doesn't pregnant. With him, she's an Oris.
She doesn't want becoming pregnant from him. It's a good story. The Gemara doesn't say it, but it's a very nice story. Okay, let's see the Gemara back to you. Evet paisol mishum bia. We said an evet would pass a woman because of bia, but an evet is not miyuchas, so al vlad he doesn't have any. Al vlad he has no validity. Right? So zok the Gemara. My time amakra ha'isha velida tiel abdinah. So you see that even if a yid, an evet ivri, has relations with a shivcha, he doesn't keep those children. They're not in the siachas acherov. They stay with the other. Mamzer paisol umaychel. Tanarabon. V'zera ein la. It says if a woman was married to Yisrael, if a Baskar was married to Yisrael, so she cannot eat truma. But then her husband died. The Uvaskar Kisiel Mana Grusha, V'zera ein la, and has no children. Then and only then can she go back to eat truma. So what does ein la mean? Ein li elazara. We only know for Pashut that if she has an actual child still living, that she may not continue to eat truma. She may not go back to eat truma. But zera zera minayin. What if she has no surviving children, but she has a surviving grandchild? How do we know that also counts to prevent her from going back to her father's household to eat truma? Any type of remaining offspring from this union would be enough to connect her to her husband to prevent her from going back to her father's household to eat truma. Ainli elazar kosher, zera posel minayin. How do we know in the Tambabazar it also counts, like we learned? Talmud Leimar, Bezera Ein La, Ein Vidashin Ayin Allah. Analyze it. Any little minimal zera will accept, even if it's apostle zera. Correct the Gemara, didn't we just use the pasuk of Bezera Ein La to teach us that an anical counts as well? Zok Gemara, Zera Zara. The truth is, I don't need a pasuk for that. We just used it to express something, but that's not the real makar. The real makar we know anyway because of b'nei banim hareim kiban. There's a halacha that grandchildren are like children. We had it earlier. That's an anganim nezach. We don't even need a pasuk for that. And therefore, ki yitzrach kroi lezera pasuk. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amalei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Come on, our Mishnah that tells us, Dr. Rashi, the maslish the ketani ovid kachavim ve'evid habal b'shishol avlad mamzer. Our mission tells us that Eved Kechavim be'Eved Habal Bashol Avad Mamzer. Now think about it. That's only an Isser Lav. It's not an Isser curse. So why is it Vlad Mamzer? Command Rabbi Kiva must be going according to Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva says that even Chayve Lavan produce a Mamzer. So Gemara, no. I feel Temer Rabbanan. Even if you go like the Rabbanan, that normally an Isser Lav does not produce a Mamzer, but with Kechavim be'Eved Maidu. He told us that so even though you don't hold the Rabbi Kiva and you hold normally an Isser Lav does not produce a Mamzer, there's an exception by an Eved and Eved, Habal Bas Yisrael, everybody agrees that it produces a Mamzer. Kohen Gadol, Palam Shapois. So we had an interesting case where the Kohen Gadol was an anicle of a husband that was a Yisrael. He would pass all the woman from Truma. So this is the story where we said, you think my anicle is a Kohen Gadol, my other anicle is a Mamzer. So this is the Gemara saying it. Hareini kaparis ben biti kuza. I'm happy with my anicle, who's a shvacha anicle, who's a Mamzer. Shemachileni b'Truma. The Maisa is the only surviving anicle from a Zayda who was a Kohen, and therefore I can still eat Truma on his behalf. The Eina kapara, and I'm not so happy with ben biti. The other anicle, of course, this can't be the same woman. Kada, even though he's a full jug, in other words, he's a kosher mensch, he's a kosher mensch. But Shepashleni minat Truma, he causes that I'm not able to eat Truma because he's an anicle of a Yisrael, which connects me to a Yisrael, which stops me from eating Truma. And with that, we're finished this beautiful parak.
This Rabbanan is the way people speak, the way women speak. Again, women are speaking like this.
Who is it quoting?
Yeah.
Maybe it is quoting. Yeah.
Grandmother
Yeah.
might give you
So this is this is another case of where women are always looking for their own good. Where's full of this? I see. Okay, you're much right. They get upset.
So there's a very interesting shaila to discuss when you say B'nei Padam Arem Kabbalah. It was actually a shaila brought up in the earlier Achronim. What if someone's father is our Rosh Hashanah? So by an Aliyah, he doesn't want to be called up. Someone ben someone. Let's say his name is Chaim ben Beryl. I don't want to be called up Chaim ben Beryl. You know why? Because Beryl is known to be a big Rosh. I don't even want to be connected to him. So are you allowed to call him up after his Zayda's name? Chaim ben Shai, if the Zayda was Shai. So the Poskim said, yes, Divat b'nei bonim, Harahem kabonim, you can call him up that way. What if he says, just call me up Chaim? So there's a long tshuva from the Avnei Nezer, who writes that the Kehillah wanted to stop calling up the Aliyahs the way we normally do, Moshe ben Moshe, or David ben Chaim, or whatever. Because of that, they wanted to just say, Yamoid Kohen, Yamoid Levi, Yamoid Yisrael, and the Avnei Nezer railed against it because he says, this is what happened in Germany with the Haskalah. They wanted to make small changes to make it more convenient, to make it more modern, and you know what happened to all those kids? Their children aren't even Jewish anymore. He says the minhag is to call up. I'm sorry. So yeah.
You take off film.
So the Avnei Nezer rallied that when you call up someone who is Aliyah, you have to call him up his name, then his father's name.
The Rav himself, yes, last week went all out of shape because somebody davened l'chadoidi and didn't wait. Right? Remember, he didn't wait for the.
That's right, and he says the minhag is that the Chazan sings it and then the Tzibur says it, and they don't sing it all together. And it's a big outlet to sing it all together. I know, and the Rav was rallying against those rules because he said that's not the minhag, the ultimate minhag. It's a change, and it's a bad thing. You know what he said.
Yeah, and all their kids.
It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing.
Someone lives with an Eved Knani, and then the Eved Knani is free before the baby was born.
Yeah, because the child was conceived by that time. Yeah. Okay, so let's see the head of the Mishnah. So now we're learning about our favorite chapter, the Udal and the Udala. Okay. It happens a lot of cottage tools. I don't know. That's a good question. Well, if we want to know what halach is, we should send Chaim Tzvi to ask the Rav. Chaim Tzvi, why did you ask the Rav? What if you're davening for Rav in the shul and everyone's singing with you? Should I turn around and walk away? Should I go, shh, shh?
I don't know why everybody makes fun of me asking the Rav. I'll ask the Rav. I don't.
I'm not making fun of you. You're brave to ask the Rav the question. and also if the Rav doesn't want to give a straight answer, you'll corner the Rav into telling you. They'll say, listen, the Rav said it's wrong. So if the Rav said it's wrong, the Rav's got to tell me what to do, right? Okay, so we're in. We're going to get a tshuva Rishon tomorrow. Zok Gemara, ha'aral v'chol atmeim. An oral and anybody else who's tamei, lo yoichlu b'truma, may not eat truma. Of course, we're talking about a kohen. Well, what is the definition of an oral? It's not as simple as what you think it is. So Zok Rashi, an oral is kohen shemesu achav machmas milah. A kohen whose brothers died machmas milah, and because of that, he couldn't have a bris. But the fact is, he's still an oral, and therefore he can't eat truma. The Rebbeinu Tam argues very strongly all over Shas on what Rashi says. And it's not brought down with Furish and Toisus over here, but it is brought down in the Toisus of Shishonim, and he brings down here, over here. Well, let's look at the inside, because we'll look at the whole inside. This is the sheet of Rashi all over Shas. Oral l'shemesu achav machmas milah, meaning he's an oinus, he can't do a bris. V'li nira, no, v'loi nira, I don't agree with Rashi. Dimkein einoi mitzvah l'moilot. If it's a pikuach nefesh for him, he's potter from milah. How could you say someone who's potter from milah is an oral? Dimkein, I'm sorry, einoi mitzvah l'moilot pirish l'mo asatzmai. L'fi shu onus. V'ava kamoi milah shaloi b'zmana. If he would do a milah, it was like he would do a milah on the fourth day. That's not a milah. He's part of a milah. The hatafa, right? But the milah sounds not good. The kosher, the Gemara boy or a cotton mao. I can't even read it well. L'soichai shemen shal truma, because arla shaloi b'zmanim akfay loy. Right now, the child has his arla, but he's still not 8 days old, so there's no chiv milah on it. And the Gemara wanted to know if he's allowed to have enough from truma. If you learn like Rashi, that the fact that he has that skin there, even though he's an honest and he's not mechiv in milah, makes him into an arla, makes him into an oral. So then avada he's an oral. Avada you cannot be sachem b'shem shel truma. The kivan demari shemei shalach v'chas milah imkein nenesu. The kivan shenenes orla shlebes manu. It's not called orlas. V'chein pirush b'beinatam the oral ratzalemer mishumad l'orlas. He's a mishumad l'orlas, meaning not that he's a lahachas nikah, rather he's terrified. There's no medical reason why he shouldn't have a bris, but he's just terrified to do it. Such a person is who we're talking about is an oral. But someone who's dangerous for him to get a bris, that's not called an oral. So you see there's a machlokes in Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi learns that skin is there, he's an oral. Tosfos, the skin is irrelevant. If he has a chiyuv to do it and he's not doing it, then he's an oral. But if he has no chiyuv to do it, he's not an oral at all. So this makes a huge nafkamina l'alocha for things that an oral is not allowed to do. So Dr. Gemara, their wives or their servants, would be able to eat truma. Like we learned earlier, is it's like they have a sore in their mouth. That's why they can't eat truma. But as if they're seasoned to eat truma, but there's something in the way. Someone who has damaged genitals, there and their servants, they can eat, because once again, there are people who could have. However, their women can't eat, because if they were boiled their wives, they asked their wives, because their wives are not to be novellas to a daka or krishaf. But the mloyada, we should ask to a daka. What if a person was healthy when he married his wife, and he had some type of accident that his genitals got damaged, but he didn't have bia with his wife after that point, so he never asked her. So therefore, so the mloyada mishnasa tzedakah choshav charei leyachelu, because these women are the women of Kahanim, the wives of Kahanim, and they were never nesach. Now let's get into the nitty gritty of what a psuadaka is. Kol sheniftu habeim shaloi. I refer to this as scrambled eggs. Even one of them. Uchushavcha is kol shenichres hagid. If his actual gid was cut, how far does it have to be cut? If there's a part of the atara remaining, even if it's a tiny little bit, kosher, that makes that doesn't qualify yet as a krishah. Taner Rabbanan, Omar Belazar. And he's boil his wife afterwards, then his wife can eat because it's also it says la yaveh psudaku krishach l'kal Hashem. So when he has been with her, he passes her liuchsim. No, it's not his fault. If a guy's a mamzer, it's his fault. Because it wasn't completely cut off. It was cut a little bit, but there's still some remaining.
With a story like that, no?
The part that was cut off was separate. I'm sorry? There was toy like that? Oh, yeah, Babbitt, yeah. Tanya. I don't think she ate Truma. I heard that since she did that, she never ate Truma after that. Yeah. Zog to Gemara weiter. Tanya, Amar Belazar, Minayin la'oro she'ein oichel b'Truma. How do you know that an oro may not eat Truma? Nemar Toshe v'Sacher b'Pesach. It says by the Korban Pesach, Toshe v'Sacher. But Nemar Toshe v'Sacher b'Truma. T'chsev Toshe v'Koyin v'Schir lo yoichel kodesh. So it says Toshe v'Sacher by Pesach, and it says Toshe v'Sacher by Truma. Ma Toshe v'Sacher Amar b'Pesach. Just like the word Toshe v'Sacher said referring to the Korban Pesach, oral aser boy. It says beferish by the Korban Pesach that an oral may not eat from the Korban Pesach. So we dash with the Gzera Shava af Toshe v'Sacher ha'amar v'Truma. We say oral aser boy. Rabbi Kiva Omer ein itzach. Rabbi Kiva says you don't need this Gzera Shava. Harayu Omer ish. It says in the pasuk ish mizera haring utzarua izav, which prohibits them from eating truma. So the rabbis oral, and the oral would also be included in this category of ish that is prohibited from eating truma. Amamar, Rabbi Lazar Omer, Rabbi Lazar says, Nemer Toshe v'Sacher b'Pesach, v'Nemer Toshe v'Sacher b'Truma. So we're going to now analyze this Gzera Shava. Ma Toshe v'Sacher Amar b'Pesach, oral aser boy. After Toshe v'Sacher Amar b'Truma, oral aser boy. So it must be that one of these psukim are extra. Do you love mufna? Because if one of these psukim weren't extra, you can ask a pirach on the Kal V'chomer. The halacha is, if you have a Kal V'chomer that's mufna, it's extra words, then even if you have a kasha that would slug up the Kal V'chomer, you don't listen to that kasha because the Gzera Shava would trump that. So how would I be able to slug up the svara of this comparison? Zok to Gemara, the reason why an oral may not eat from the Korban Pesach is because the Korban Pesach has other chumras. There's an Isser Pigel, there's an Isser Noiser. Truma never has a problem with Pigel and Noiser. Truma lasts forever. The tummy, and there's no problem with eating. There's no problem with consuming Truma when it's tummy either, because of course you can't eat it, but you could use it as fuel. So tomorrow, you're right. It has to be extra. So Hai Mufna, the word Toshe v'Sacher in which pasuk is extra? Because we have it by Pesach and we have it by Truma. Either Truma, if you want to suggest that Toshe v'Sacher is extra by the parsha of Truma, that's not true. Matzah Stricha, we need him. The Tanya, Toshe v'Zakoni kinyan olam. Toshe of a kohen that can eat is someone who's koni kinyan olam, which means even an eved ivri of a kohen who was nirtza, who now is going to be there until Yovel, is allowed to eat Truma when he's by the Kohen's house. And Schir, Zekani Kinyan Shanim. Schir is an Eved Ivri, he's only going to be an Eved Ivri for 6 years. So therefore, we need those words. Zok Gemara, V'yomer Toshev, Val Yomer Schir. Why did it tell us, both Toshev and Schir, let it just tell us that even an Eved for 6 years can eat Truma, so Kol Shekin an Eved until 50 years, until Yovel can eat Truma. I'm sorry, it's exactly the opposite. I was exactly the opposite. A Toshev and a Sacher may not eat Truma. A Toshev may not eat Truma. So Zok Gemara, so say for Karen. Why doesn't it say Toshev al Yom Sacher? And would say I would say Kani Kini Aylam Ein Oechel. If Eved Ivri, who's a Nirtza, who's going to be by the Kohen until Yovel, if even he cannot eat Truma, Kani Kini Shalom like Kol Shekin, and Eved Ivri, who's only there for 6 years, surely cannot eat Truma. Zok Gemara, that wouldn't work because Ilu Kain Hayisi Omer Toshev Zak Kani Kini Shalom. If it would have only said one word Toshav, I would have said that Toshav means an Eved that's only there for 6 years. But I would have thought, so therefore I need 2 words, Socher v'Toshav. But Socher v'limit al Toshav to tell us that so therefore I need both Toshav and Socher by Truma to tell us that even if the Eved Ivri is going to be there until Yovel, he still has no right to eat Truma. The Pesach movement. So that we're going to have to say that one of these words by the Parsha of Korban Pesach is extra. Let's see which ones. Hi Toshav, the Schir, the cause of a Korban Pesach, my new. What are they? Inema Toshav is Schir Mamish. When it says that a Toshav and a Schir by Korban Pesach can eat, if it means a Toshav and a Schir Mamish, we don't have like Toshav and Schir, it's like a Pesach. So if a Toshav and Schir is referring to the same type of avodim as we spoke about by Truma, which means an Eved Ivri for 6 years, or an Eved Ivri until Yovel, I need a pasuk to tell me that those avodim are mechuyev to eat from the Korban Pesach. But just because they sold themselves for 6 years, if to the Pesach, I would have a havamina. But they don't have to keep the mitzvah of Korban Pesach. They have to keep every other mitzvah. But we might know that they don't eat truma. So if they don't eat truma, clearly they're not kali. So if that's the case, Avada, they should have a chiyuv to eat Korban Pesach. So why does that have to speak it out? Amalei kanilei rabbi. You see from the fact that they cannot eat truma, their odin doesn't own them. Hachanami lekanilei rabbi. So if that's the case, it's pashut that they have to eat from the Korban Pesach. So elalafnuya, it must be that the word toshiv and the word socher by Korban Pesach is extra because it's pashut that they would have a chiyuv to eat from the Korban Pesach. Zok Gemara ba'kati mufna mitzadechatu. There's no extra in the toshiv v'socher mentioned by Truma. There's only an extra by the toshiv v'socher that's mentioned by Korban Pesach. Ushmein Rabbi Elazar. When we learned, Rabbi Elazar taught us halacha. Damer mufna mitzadechad l'meidinu mashivim. If only one side is mufna, then you could still slug up the Gzeres Shava. So, why can't we slug up the Gzeres Shava over here? Because we had an argument that just because he can't eat from the Korban Pesach, just because an oral can't eat from the Korban Pesach, who said that an oral can't eat Truma? Zakta Gemara. Therefore, we'll say we need to have it mufna from both sides. So we need to have an extra word, not only by Pesach, but also by Truma, and we don't have it. Since I have 2 words, Toshav and Socher, that are both extra by the Korban Pesach, I don't need it. Shadi Chad Alame, v'Chadi Shad Amalam. We have 2 words that are extra by Pesach, Toshav and Socher. So we could lend one of those words to Truma, and now we have an extra word on both sides. So now that you have this Gzeres Shava, why limit it to learning that an oral can eat Truma? There's other things that you could learn. Why don't you say Ima Pesach, Onion Osir Boy, Af Truma, Onion Osir Boy? An onion may not eat from the Korban Pesach. So why shouldn't we say as well that Truma, an onion may not eat? It says the Chazor, and we learn that Zarus Amartila, only Zarus, someone who's foreign to being a Kohen, only that would be prohibited from eating Truma, V'loy Aninas. And we had this a couple of lot ago. Ema V'loy Arus. The Chazor is being memayit somebody and saying that there's a certain person who you might think couldn't eat Truma. We're telling you, the Torah is telling you that you could eat Truma. And we applied it to Aninas. Maybe apply it to an Arla and say that an Einan is also eat. You can't say that an oral is allowed to eat Truma because we have the Gzeres Shava. You have one limit to tell you that one of these people could eat. You have another limit to Gzeres Shava to tell you that they can eat, and you decided to apply the Isser to an oral and the Heter to an onion. Maybe flip it around. It's more mistaber to say that an oral should not be able to Truma. An oral is missing a Maisa because they have to chop up the orla. Umaisa begufa, it's also an action that's done in the guf of the person. And on his chorus, someone who doesn't get a bris is chayiv chorus. And v'yeshnei lefnei adibur, the mitzvah of Mila was even before Matan Torah. And umilas zechorav v'avodav makeves. And even if you didn't make Mila on your children male or your avodim, you also wouldn't be able to eat from the Korban Pesach. So it's very chomer. It's a much more serious problem. And that's why we decide to prohibit the oral from eating truma. So Aninas have a I'll show you ways in which Aninas is more severe. So you can yeshna b'chol shah. That could happen any time. Your bris could only happen once in your 8 days. But it's not something, an onion, you can become an onion over and over again. You can only become an oral once in your life. It's a once in a life event. But an onion, a person could lose many relatives and become an onion many times. But the hagis by nashim and nashim, it applies to men and women, unlike the norla. And the ein biyad l'sakin is happening. An oral can fix himself. He can get a bris. An onion is out of his control. So there's 3 things that are very powerful that show aninas is more common.
No, but he had more than 3 things.
Zaktumar hanech nefishan. By oral there's more. Rav Amar b'loy hanech nefishan nami ilay matzis amrit. Even without the svar of hanech nefishan, you wouldn't be able to say that an oral should be mutter to eat from truma. Why? Shafkinin arlis dechsiv bigufei de pesach. Where do we know that an oral may not eat from the korban pesach? It says it's black and white in the Torah. Bi'alfinin aninos mi pesach the pesach gufei mi ma'aser gaminon. It doesn't say anywhere in the parsha of korban pesach that an onion can't eat from the korban pesach. We learn it through another limud. So something that was imported to pesach from somewhere else, we're not necessarily going to export to truma, but the issue for an oral to eat a korban pesach is in pesach itself. So therefore, we'll export that to truma. By a korban pesach, you're not allowed to eat it, even if your avodim or your children didn't have a bris. So maybe av truma mila sechar b'avodim makeves. Maybe a kohen shouldn't be able to eat truma if he has an eved who didn't mal it. And we learn mila sechar b'avodim makeves boy. So it's ozrechal boy, davka by the korban pesach. Is there a problem if you didn't mal as a char b'avodim? So milas char b'avodim melekas boy melechal b'pesach. Then milas char b'avodim makeves b'trum. But maling your children or your avodim won't impact your ability to eat truma. In fact, the Gemara ihachi ema kol oral lo yochal boy say the same thing by arevus. It also says by korban pesach kol oral lo yochal boy. So say boy eno oichel abel oichelu b'truma. Make a deal. You can't eat korban pesach, but you can eat truma even though you're an oral. Up to Gemara, you cannot say that because aksiv toishav v'sacher. We have that Zereshava again that tells us that there's an issue that we're importing from korban pesach. So Gemara, my rights. Why are you saying that you're going to learn isser to someone who's an oral, but you're not going to learn isser to milas char v'avodav? Maybe sefer care. So Gemara mistaber arlis to gufay have a little rebuye. It's more mistaber to ask someone from eating truma if he's an oral himself. Why? Shekein ma'isa begufay. The honors courage. The Gemara adrab milas char v'avodav. The have a little rebuye. Shekein yeshna b'chol shah. You can buy a nev at any time. It's not just once in a lifetime. So Gemara hanach lefishin. The Yosy Simon Yevamos Daf, even without the fact that there's more reasons why a person who's an oral shouldn't be able to eat truma, without that reason, so the arlis to gufay, arlis to ma'akfebe. It's not mistaber to say that if he himself is an oral, he can eat truma. But if his avodim are oral, he can't eat it. That's not mistaber. Okay, so let's stop over here, and the mission will be mamshech tomorrow. So these are easier gemaras. I'm not sure. I'm pretty much prepared up to here. I didn't have a chance to go back there.
Reminds me of the